We're going to switch topics a little bit and talk about something a little bit greener, which is modern ag. And I was reflecting, Kyle, that Atlantic has given us a permission to have sort of a self-driving conversation, which is a little ironic because I think the earlier topics we had this morning and the fact that actually in ag we've been using auto-steer tractors for many, many years now. So apparently we're pioneers in some of these spaces that we didn't even realize. Although I suspect a little bit has to do with the fact that if you inadvertently run over a corn plant, it typically does not litigate or scream, so it might help the situation. So, you know, I think about the revolution that's really happening in modern ag and the innovation that's been taking place. And like many other industries, you know, we're certainly being touched by both digital, machine learning, AI, all these other things that we've been talking about. And it's been amazing to me because I think about the past 20 years, we went through sort of a biological evolution in genomics, and we've been using the data from genomics to help drive and develop seeds that are much more tolerant to environmental stresses, helping growers become more productive, more sustainable. And now we're seeing what's taking place on the farm in terms of decision making. And at Monsanto, we often talk about growers having to make roughly 40 key decisions on the farm every year. And the data that we're now helping them to take advantage of and use and harness and make those decisions in a much more data-driven and analytic way is really amazing to me. But a lot of that technology and capability is really being invented in other places. And so, you know, my question to you is really just, what are you doing at Yield Lab and kind of what do you see that's happening out there in terms of innovation and where is it coming from?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So the Yield Lab is a global network of agriculture technology-focused accelerator programs. We have one in North America based in St. Louis, one in Europe based in Ireland, and we're launching one this week based in Latin America in Argentina. So we look at hundreds of ag tech startups a year and ultimately pick 4 to 6 per continent that we invest in, usually about $100,000 a piece, and put them through a mentoring program. So there's 22 companies in the portfolio today. What we've really seen is a lot of startup companies utilizing the technologies we've talked about here today. So we have an investment in Europe in a company called RootWave, which is using electricity to kill weeds versus using an herbicide. Right now it's on a handheld, but ultimately they're using machine learning to try to use cameras, put it on a robot, and be able to identify that's a weed, that's a corn plant, you know, shock the weed, kill the weed. We've got a company using LiDAR technology. We watched a video earlier on self-driving cars. We've got a company in Florida called AgriPoint using LiDAR technology in permanent crops in orange groves. So they use the technology to count the number of oranges on the tree, the number of blueberries on the bush. They can ultimately help with smarter spraying, so to use herbicides or pesticides more efficiently, smaller amounts of it, but more targeted where the fruit might be. So these technologies are making their way onto the farm just like they're making their way into other elements of our lives. I think the technology platform that you referenced that we see a lot that we haven't talked about much here today yet is CRISPR-Cas9 and gene editing, really utilizing gene editing for a variety of different applications. One investment we have in a company that we're excited about is called Arvigenics. Arvigenics is trying to domesticate a new crop. They're trying to bring a new cover crop to market. Cover crops are important because they're generally planted, you know, after corn or soy comes out in the fall, and they're pulled out before planting in the spring. But when you plant something on those fields, you ultimately help keep soil from eroding, and you can keep nitrogen from running off into the rivers. We have a fairly low usage of cover crops in the U.S. It's somewhere between 10 to 15%. Partially because it's just an expense. Farmers can't make any money off of it. They plant it and then they kill it before they plant their corn or beans. Arvigenics is trying to create a cash crop. So they're using pennycress. It produces an oil seed. It's similar to a mustard seed. The farmer can ultimately make money selling the oil and the leftover part into animal feed. It has very high protein. But their challenge has been the leftover protein in early trials. The cows found it was spicy, so the cows weren't eating it. So they're using gene editing technology to reduce the spiciness and ultimately try to create a new company that has a double bottom line, one that can increase farmer income, but also have an environmental benefit because it can reduce runoff and erosion. What kind of technologies are you guys seeing?
Well, I think what we're seeing is really a lot of technologies that are helping growers make decisions that are moving us from where you historically would make decisions on a field basis. And if you think about a typical field that a farmer might use in the United States, might be 100, 150 acres. But if you've ever actually looked at a field, it is extremely variable. And so what you see is when a farmer runs a combine through the field at harvest, and they're harvesting their corn or soybeans, for example, you could see corn fluctuating in yield. In one part of the field, you might be getting 50, 80 bushels, and then another part of that same field, you're seeing 250 bushels. So getting a better handle on why is that happening and what we can do about it and what sorts of decisions can we apply to helping with the farmer in terms of increasing the productivity. And then as you mentioned, part of it is also about sustainability. Today, in most cases, a farmer, if they think they may have a problem in the field with a certain disease, they'll walk into that field a few rows and they'll look around and they see that maybe some of the plants are maybe infected by a fungus. And then they're going to call in and they're going to get an applicator to apply a fungicide across that entire field. But we're evolving now where we're using drones and satellite imagery and other technologies that allow us to really precisely monitor and understand where in that part of the field is there really a problem. And then how do we solve the problem in a much more precise way. So you just sort of see this continuous evolution of precision ag where we're evolving to making decisions really what I call square meter by square meter, both what you plant and then how you manage that crop in each of those square meters. So that's the kind of stuff that we see happening. And ultimately, I think what it ultimately brings it all back to is growing our crops in a way that allows us to be more sustainable and allows us to use really the same footprint in agriculture and not be required to extend that footprint and still, be allowed to produce enough food that's safe and affordable for our country and others around the world. So that's kind of the stuff we see. What do you think are maybe some of the, maybe next big things that could potentially happen as well?
Well, one area that we get a lot of companies apply working on is the microbiome. So just as there's a lot of interest on the human side on all these bacteria and bugs that live in a symbiotic relationship with humans, the same sort of thing is going on in the soil. So we've seen an explosion in investment in companies that can ultimately possibly reduce herbicide or pesticide by using a natural occurring bacteria that might be be able to improve plant health if we can get it back to wherever that kind of traditional soil mix might have been. So we've seen quite a bit there. Do you guys see much in the microbiome? I know you've got some seed coatings that you've been working on.
Yeah, we actually have a big bet in the microbiome space, and we're working with Novozymes, which is an expert in microbials used in other areas and other industries. And for us, it's amazing, right? So if you take a tablespoon of soil and you measure how many microbes are in there, there's actually roughly 2 billion. And so, what are those 2 billion microbes doing, and how do they work together with the crop plant? And I think we're just beginning to tap and understand our knowledge of what's happening and unravel the biology of what's taking place. And I think the last piece of it is all these things are interconnected. There's no one decision that a grower makes or one thing that's happening in the field that isn't somehow connected to something else. And so if you bring it all back to this whole concept of data science and machine learning and how do you make these decisions in the right interconnected way, I think that's the real promise that we see in modern ag. And so it's going to be an amazing journey. I think there's still so much to learn and unravel. But I think there's a lot of excitement. But I think the startup space is just absolutely critical because this external innovation engine is really going to, I think, help us drive and deliver what we see as an opportunity.
Yeah, we've definitely seen both a growth in the amount of funding for startups in this category. AgFunder, which is an organization that tracks this, said in 2010 there was about $500 million, $500 million, excuse me, invested in the ag tech space. In the first half of this year, there was $4.4 billion. So you can really see the explosion of funding. And the other thing is there's been a growth in the number of acquisitions in this space as well. John Deere's been very aggressive. Dow and DuPont, Monsanto certainly has bought a number of companies. So it's an exciting time.
It's a very exciting time. And it's amazing to me because a lot of what's coming, they're actually coming from industries outside of ag. right? So all of these things that we talk about today typically have some utilization in other industries. We talked about all the automation and deep learning and other things. Obviously, those are touching many, many different things. But even these areas like the microbiome have interconnections with medical science. Gene editing is certainly being used with both animals and with humans, and how do we help with challenges that we have in those areas as well. So I love the convergence of science. I always think that some of the most amazing innovation and inventions happen when you have those interfaces and those interconnections. And so I think it's really about how ag is going to be positioned and be able to take the opportunity to take advantage of those things that are taking place. So hopefully we've educated you a little bit more about what's happening in the sleepy world of agriculture. It's maybe not as sleepy as you might think. And certainly also, if you want to learn more, look at modernag.org, which is a website we have set up and gives you a lot more information on some of these topic areas. So certainly we'd encourage you to take a look at that and have some interest. So with that, thank you very much, and we look forward to the rest of the agenda today.
Thanks.